Hello and welcome to the fifth and final module for this unit. Here we're going to be learning about how we can represent genetic inheritance in something called a pedigree, which is kind of like a family tree, but we're using certain shapes and images to represent how different traits get passed on through generations. So we're going to look and learn how we can construct these pedigrees and also how we can get some information from them. So let's get started with that now. So what is a pedigree? Well, it's these sorts of diagrams. They're family records in a diagram format, and they're showing how traits get inherited over several generations. So we use specific shapes to represent different individuals in the family, and we colour them in, and we use different patterns to represent if they've got traits or anything else that's happened to them that we need to communicate to other people. So there are some specific symbols when it comes to pedigrees that you do need to learn. So they're shaped, first of all, like family trees. So a pedigree overall, you're going to read it like you would a family tree. The most recent generation will be at the bottom, and the oldest generation, like the grandparents or the great-great-grandparents, will be at the top. Okay, so here we've got two parents, and then it branches down into their two kids. So that's a really basic pedigree. You've got two parents and their offspring. Now, there are specific symbols that mean specific things. They are always the same. There are a couple of variants, and I've tried to include them where appropriate. So the most basic things you need to know is that in a pedigree, a male is going to be a square and a female is going to be a circle. Now, if that is an uncoloured in shape, like the first two here for male and female, what that means is that whatever trait you're looking at, be it something like hair colour or some genetic disorder, if it's not coloured in, that means they don't have it. Okay, not filled in means not someone who has the trait. If they do have that trait, then they're coloured in. So here you've got two individuals that are coloured in. So the coloured in box is the male who's affected, and the coloured in circle is the female who's affected. For certain traits, you can have people who are carriers. This means that they'll have a copy of the gene that gives that trait, but they're not actually expressing the trait themselves. For example, you could have someone who has brown eyes, but does also have the gene for blue eyes. So they will have brown eyes, that's what they're expressing, but they're carrying the blue-eyed gene, so they are a carrier. In that case, you will either see them written as the shape for their gender with a dot inside, or there's an alternative on the right here, which is half the shape is coloured in. So if you see either the shape with a dot in the middle or the shape that's half coloured in, both of those are ways of representing carriers. If you're drawing a pedigree, pick one way of doing it and stick to it. Don't flip and change throughout your pedigree, and certainly don't between genders either. Now, there are a few more shapes, or groupings of shapes, I should say, to be aware of, and that comes to do with twins. If you are talking identical twins, not only will they come branched from the same point, like we can see here and here, this is for all twins. If you're talking about identical twins, there will be a line connecting them like this. So normally you don't have a line like between two individuals unless you're trying to say that they're married, except with identical twins, and that's to show that connection between them. Fraternal twins or non-identical twins, they branch out from the same point from their parents because they're born at the same time, but they don't have that line between them. Now, the other thing to note is obviously if you have a male and a female who are twins, they must be non-identical. So really that line is important for distinguishing between either identical twins or fraternal twins where you have the same gender. So that's just how we represent twins. And so overall with your pedigree, you're going to have a sort of parental line, and a line that connects two people like this shows that they're married, and then from that line between them it goes down to any offspring that they have, and you can have that there. And then of course you can keep this going down and down and down as the generations go on. So that's the basics of some pedigree symbols. Alright, time to put this into practice. Here you have a pedigree, and there are 7 things I want you to work out based off what you've just learnt about the symbols. So pause the video and answer those questions, and when you come back we'll go through them. So go ahead and answer them now. Alrighty, let's go through the answers here. First of all, how many people? Well, the number of people will be equal to the number of squares and circles put together. So you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there are 9 people overall. Now, number 2, how many males? Well, males are the squares, so we will just count up the squares. 1, 2, 3. So there's 3 males here. How many females? That's the circles. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 females. Now we're starting to get a little bit more specific. How many males have the trait? So we know we have 3 males here, here, and here. If they have the trait, if they're with the trait, they're going to be coloured in. And so out of our 3 males, only one of them is coloured in. So the answer to 4 is 1. 5 says how many males are without it? Well, that would be 1, 2. So we have 2 without the trait. Now onto the females. Females with the trait, we've got 1, 2, 3 of them who are coloured in. So those are the 3 with the trait. And then 1, 2, 3 who are not coloured in, so that is 3 without the trait. So 9 people, 3 males, 6 females, 1 male with the trait, 2 males without, 3 females who have the trait, and 3 females who do not. So that is the answers for those questions. Now, sometimes if we're working with a small pedigree, it can be fairly easy to communicate which person in that pedigree that we're talking about. But the bigger a pedigree gets, the harder it can be to be like, no, I'm talking about that person. No, the one there. And getting someone to actually understand what you're meaning is, particularly if you can't point directly at the person, or if you're having to write a written answer to something. So to help everyone be able to identify individuals nice and easily and be able to talk about a specific individual, there is a specific way we number individuals in a pedigree. So there are 2 parts to this numbering system. The first thing is we're going to number the generation. So we start at the top. So the top row is the first generation, then the second row is the second generation, and the bottom row here will be our third generation. We don't actually write generation 1, 2, and 3. We use Roman numerals. So it's generation I, generation II, and generation III. Obviously, the more generations you have, you just keep adding numbers to them using Roman numerals. So that's the first part of our numbering system. The second part is to actually give a normal number to the person in that row. So what you're going to do is here, we've got 2 people in generation I. So we're going to number from left to right. This is the first person, so they get a 1, and this is the second person, so they get a 2. And then we go to generation 2. In generation 2, going from left to right, this is the first person, that's the second, that's the third, that's the fourth, that's the fifth. So we just number it normally going left to right in each generation. Every time we get to a new generation, we restart the numbering at 1. So what we do is, if I want to communicate to you that I'm talking about this person here, I would actually give you a specific designation to represent them. And so what I would say is I'd first of all tell you their generation. So here they're in the 3rd generation, so I. So I'd write 3 I's, a dash, and then they're the 4th one along from left to right. So I'd put number 4. So what I'd write is I-4. And then you could go, okay, there's 3 I's, that means they're in the 3rd generation, they're in this row here, and the 4 means they're in the 4th position. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you would know that I was talking about this person here. All right, so that's how we use this numbering system to communicate who we're talking about in a pedigree. So let's put this into practice. Here are some questions and a pedigree. Go through answering the questions using what you just learnt about the special numbering system. Pause the video, and when you come back, we'll go through the answers. So pause the video now. Alrighty, let's go through the answers together. So question 1, how many generations are there? You can just count the rows, or you can go, okay, the bottom number here is IV, that's a 4 in Roman numerals, so there must be 4 generations. The largest generation or generations have the most individuals in them. So you can see that in 2 or II and 3, III, both of those generations have 6 people. So they're the 2 largest. And the smallest ones would be generation 1 or I and 4 or IV. And so this one up here and this one down the bottom here are our smallest. All affected individuals. So we can see, we know that if someone's affected or has a trait, they're coloured in. So we can see that there are 3 coloured in shapes here, and they're all males, but we need to communicate who they are. So this first one is in generation II, and they're in 3rd position. So we'd say II3. This next person is in generation III, and they're in 5th position, so it'd be III5. And our last person down here is in the 4th generation, or IV, so we would say IV, and then they're in position 1, so it would be IV1. So that is how we identify all the affected individuals. Lastly, we're going to flip it. We're going to see if we can then interpret from our numbering system the specific individuals that are being talked about and whether or not they're affected. So first of all, we have I1. So I is generation up here, and 1 will be the person in 1st position. And so we can see that's this person here, and no, they're not affected. Next we have II2, so second generation, and position 2, again, not affected. Then the next one is II3, so same generation, but one along, and we can see that yes, they are affected. Then we can go third generation, III5, so that's here, this generation, position 5, yes, they're affected. And then III6 will be the next one along in that generation, no, they're not affected. And finally, IV2, so IV, our last generation here, 2, second position, so it's this person here, no, they are not affected. So that's how we can use it to identify specific people. So now it's going to be your turn, and you're going to practice a little bit of actually drawing a pedigree. Basically, with a pedigree, there's some handy steps that you can go through instead of just trying to pull one from sort of nothing. I would recommend starting with a family tree. Sketch out a really basic sort of family tree to begin with, just so you know the positions of all the people and how many people there are in each generation and who's connected to who and how they're related and that sort of thing. Once you have a really basic family tree, then go through and start adding in details of who does and doesn't have traits. So it might just be really, really simple, like this person has brown hair or this person has blonde hair. If you know somebody's genotype, you can include it, though generally speaking, we focus more on a phenotype with a pedigree. So this is sort of what's happening here with these smiling faces. Instead of it being a proper pedigree, we're just sort of sketching out some faces and what traits they have in terms of hair colour. Once you have sort of this basic family tree done with some people in it and what traits they have, go back over and start replacing things with this proper symbols. So here we know we have a guy and he is a carrier for the trait. It's just something we happen to know for this one. So we'll replace his smiling face with a square, and in this case it's half shaded to represent that he's a carrier. We're following the blonde hair trait. So here we've got a lady who does have blonde hair, and she is over here. Now this pedigree that's been built off this is actually missing the coloured in shapes, so you are tracking whether or not they have blonde hair through here, so that should actually be coloured in as a dark colour, and so should this one here and this one down here as they get swapped out. Once you've replaced your people in your family tree with the appropriate shapes and everything, remembering to use the coloured in ones where appropriate, start filling in the numbering, so that's for your generations and then for the individuals, and finally add a title and a symbol key, so whoever is reading it knows the trait you're actually tracing through this family tree. One last little point is that you won't always be able to identify carriers in the pedigree, and that's okay. If you can, do it. If you can't, that's fine. For some pedigrees, there won't actually be any carriers, so don't stress about it if you can't identify them in a generic pedigree. Alright, here's an activity for you to complete as a bit of practice in drawing your own pedigree. When you're done, make sure to turn this into your teacher, either in person or through an online submission or email or something along those lines. And that is it for this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.